Someone lit a fire in southern Chile 14,500 years ago. They cooked food, they built shelter, they left behind tools, bones, and wild potato skins. The problem, according to every textbook on Earth, no one was supposed to be there yet. The land bridge from Siberia, the only accepted route into the Americas, hadn't even opened a corridor that far south. So either someone got to the bottom of a continent before anyone got to the top, or the textbooks are wrong. It's the second one. And the story of how long it took to admit that is more disturbing than the discovery itself. If you're new here, we open the cases, history closed too early. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's start with what everyone agreed on. 1929, Clovis, New Mexico. Archaeologists find stone tools buried with mammoth bones. Beautiful tools, fluted, precise, unlike anything found before. Dated to 13,000 years ago. The conclusion was swift. These were the first Americans. They came from Siberia, crossed a land bridge when the glaciers retreated, spread south through an ice-free corridor. One migration, one route, one people. The Clovis First model. Within a generation, it stopped being a theory. It became a fact. And in archaeology, facts have defenders. Funding went to projects that assumed Clovis First. Careers were built on it. The journals that published the papers were run by the people who built those careers. When you control what gets published, you control what gets found. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how institutions work. And it's exactly what made what happened next so uncomfortable for everyone involved. Southern Chile, 1978. Tom Dillahay is a young American archaeologist teaching at a local university. A colleague leads him to a creek called Chinchihuapi, near a small town called Monteverde. The site is extraordinary, not just because of what's there, but because of how it survived. A waterlogged peat bog sealed the whole thing, stopped decomposition cold. So instead of just stone tools, which is all most ancient sites preserve, Dillahay finds wooden tent stakes still standing in the ground, mastodon bones with human cut marks, wild potato skins, medicinal plants, seaweed from the coast, carried 60 miles inland, 14,500 years old, 1,500 years before Clovis, at the bottom of South America, which the land bridge corridor hadn't even reached yet. This site doesn't just predate Clovis, it makes Clovis mathematically impossible as the first entry point. Dillahay publishes his findings, and here's what the archaeology establishment does with evidence that breaks their model. They question his methods. They suggest the dates are contaminated. They imply he's misidentifying natural formations as human artifacts. Senior researchers dismiss him publicly at conferences. His papers take years to get through peer review. For 19 years, Tom Dillahay is treated as the man trying to destroy American archaeology's founding story. Not because the evidence is weak, because the evidence is strong. Comment below. When a scientist gets attacked for what they find rather than how they found it, does that make you trust the finding more or trust the field less? I genuinely want to know. 1997, the field blinked. A delegation of the most prominent archaeologists in North America traveled to Monteverde in person. They spent days in the mud, going through the site, checking the evidence themselves. Then they went home and published a statement. Monteverde was real. The dates were accurate. Pre-Clovis occupation of the Americas was confirmed. 19 years, one man's entire career. To get the field to look at evidence they'd already dismissed and admit what it showed. Textbooks were quietly rewritten. The Clovis model was refined. The popular press barely covered it. And the people who spent 2 decades dismissing Dillahay never fully reckoned with what that dismissal cost. And then, March 2026, a new study appeared. A team published research claiming Monteverde wasn't pre-Clovis after all, that the ancient wood giving the site its age had been mixed in by creek erosion, that the whole site was only 4,000 years old. Dillahay, now in his 70s, called it egregiously poor geological work. Other researchers called it cherry-picking. One geneticist said flatly that the genetics don't care. The DNA models are consistent with pre-Clovis peopling, regardless of what one site shows. The case was supposed to be closed. It isn't. But here's what the Monteverde fight obscures. Monteverde isn't even the most mysterious part of this story anymore. Because if people were in southern Chile 14,500 years ago, before the land bridge corridor opened, how did they get there? The leading answer is the Kelp Highway, not a land crossing, a coastal route, small boats moving south along the Pacific coastline, sustained by kelp forest ecosystems that run almost continuously from Siberia all the way to South America. Rich in fish, shellfish, seabirds, enough food to sustain a moving population for thousands of miles. It's elegant. It explains the geography problem completely, and there's almost no physical evidence for it. Not because the route didn't exist, because the ocean swallowed it. When the last ice age ended and the glaciers melted, sea levels rose and drowned the entire Pacific coastline these people would have traveled. Everything they left behind, campsites, tools, fire pits, is now sitting 400 feet underwater. We're not missing the evidence because the journey didn't happen. We're missing it because the planet changed. The coastline these people walked is gone. The proof is at the bottom of the ocean, and the only way we're going to recover it is with technology we're still developing. Then there's the piece of evidence nobody saw coming. In 2016, geneticists analyzing ancient DNA from indigenous populations in the Amazon found something that had no business being there. Buried in the genomes of certain Brazilian tribes, groups with no known contact with Polynesia, Australia, or Melanesia, was a genetic signature from an unknown ancient population. They named it Population Y, after the Tupi word for ancestor. Population Y's closest living relatives are Aboriginal Australians and Melanesians, people from the other side of the Pacific Ocean. This signal isn't from recent contact. It's woven into the founding genetics of some of the earliest South American populations, carried in by the first wave, not added later. How did Australasian genetics end up in the Amazon? Nobody fully agrees. The leading theory: the people who first entered the Americas were already a mixed population, carrying both Siberian and Australasian ancestry, before they ever crossed into the New World. A group that had spent tens of thousands of years moving across Asia, absorbing different populations along the way, before finally turning east. Think about what that means. The first people to walk into South America weren't a simple migration of Siberian hunters. They were the end product of an epic journey that started somewhere in Southeast Asia, crossed half the planet, and carried the genetic memory of populations we haven't even fully identified yet. Not one people, not one route, a human tide, tens of thousands of years deep. If this is hitting different from anything you learned in school, that's the point. Hit like. It tells the algorithm this kind of history matters. So here's the question underneath all of this. 3 pieces of evidence: a campsite that shouldn't exist, a route that's underwater, genetics that point to people no one expected, all of them pointing in the same direction. Humans were in the Americas far earlier, via far more complex routes, representing far more diverse origins than any textbook ever suggested. So why is this still a fight? Part of it is legitimate science. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and some of these findings are genuinely contested on technical grounds. But part of it is something else. The answer to who were the first Americans isn't just archaeology. It touches land rights, indigenous sovereignty, legal claims that stretch back centuries. The deeper and older the human presence in the Americas, the stronger the moral and legal connection indigenous peoples have to this land. There are also simpler forces at work: careers, funding, the particular stubbornness of a field that spent 60 years telling one story and built an entire professional identity around it. When the evidence started contradicting the model, the people with the most to lose from being wrong were also the people deciding what counted as evidence. That's not unique to archaeology. That's just what happens when human beings are in charge of human knowledge. The case isn't closed. A campsite in Chile is being argued over right now in 2026 by people who've spent their careers on opposite sides of a question that should have been settled 30 years ago. The route is underwater. The genetics are pointing somewhere unexpected. And somewhere under 400 feet of Pacific Ocean, There are campsites and fire pits and tools that would answer every remaining question, if we could reach them. The first Americans weren't who the textbook said. The second question, the one nobody asked loudly enough, is why it took so long to even look, and who benefited from the not looking. If this opens something up for you, hit like and subscribe. We cover the cases history filed away before the evidence was in. Drop a comment. Which piece of evidence hits hardest? The campsite, the underwater route, or the genetics? And do you think the 2026 counter study is legitimate science or a last stand for a dead model? The case is still open. See you in the next chapter.